Your Honor, she is a trust fund ghost with no verifiable life, who poisoned her grandfather's mind in his final years. Those words came out of my uncle's high-priced attorney like he'd rehearsed them in a mirror. They landed hard, echoing through a courtroom packed with people who used to call themselves my family. My Uncle Robert sat at the defense table, arms crossed, wearing the same smug expression he'd worn my entire life. The one that says money built the world and everyone else is just renting space in it. His lawyer wasn't done. He called me a nobody, an unstable manipulator who'd wormed her way into an old man's estate. I didn't say a word. I kept my hands folded in my lap and let him keep talking, because every sentence out of his mouth was another shovel of dirt in a grave he didn't know he was digging. Beside me, my attorney, Chloe, rose to her feet. No dramatics. No raised voice. She simply held up a single black envelope, sealed shut with dark wax, and asked the bailiff to hand it directly to Judge Vance. Before we get to what was written on that page, if you've watched enough of these to know a good one when you see it, hit subscribe right now, because you do not want to miss where this goes. Judge Vance broke the seal, pulled out one sheet of heavy paper, started reading. I watched his expression change in real time, that flat, bored courtroom face cracking apart into something closer to disbelief. Nobody in that room breathed. Then Judge Vance did something I've never seen a judge do in my life. He stood up, straightened his robe like it was a uniform, and saluted me. Called me ma'am with a level of respect that made my uncle's face go the color of the courtroom walls. To understand how a woman my own family called a ghost ended up with a federal judge standing at attention in front of her, you have to go back 3 months, to a cold, overlit law office and the reading of my grandfather's will. My name doesn't matter yet. What matters is that 3 months before that courtroom scene, I was sitting in a law office that smelled like old carpet and stronger coffee, watching my Uncle Robert practically vibrate out of his chair. He was already spending the money in his head. You could see it. The way his knee bounced under the table, the way he kept glancing at his watch, like the will reading was just a formality standing between him and a yacht. The attorney read through it methodically. Liquid assets, corporate stock, cash accounts. All of it went to Robert, exactly the way everyone in that room expected. He'd built his whole identity around being my grandfather's favorite, and for the first 90% of that document, he was right. Then the attorney got to the final clause. The historic family estate, the actual land, the one Robert had already quietly lined up a commercial developer to buy, was left entirely, solely, to me. I want you to understand what happened next, because it tells you everything about who Robert really is. He erupted. Right there in a law office, in front of an attorney and half our extended family, he slammed both fists on the conference table and pointed a shaking finger at my face. Called me a manipulative leech, mocked my quiet little life in Washington. The small apartment, the job he assumed was some meaningless cubicle position I'd never bothered to explain. I sat there in complete silence. Not because he was right, because I legally couldn't say why he was wrong. My real career was protected by federal non-disclosure agreements strict enough that even acknowledging certain details out loud could be a criminal offense. Robert mistook my silence for guilt. He mistook it so completely that he decided, right then, to ruin me publicly in open court. He had no idea what he was about to unearth. To understand exactly how deep that hole went, you need to know what our family dinners were actually like, and what it cost me to sit through them for 15 years, saying absolutely nothing. Growing up in that family meant sitting through holiday dinners built like theater productions, with Robert directing every scene. Thanksgiving was his favorite stage. He'd stand at the head of the table, raise his glass to toast his son's latest corporate promotion, and the whole family would cheer on cue like a laugh track. Then, without fail, the spotlight would swing to me. Not because anyone cared what I'd been doing all year. Just to remind the table who the disappointment was. He'd look at me with this practiced, patronizing pity. Say something like, well, there's honor in simple work too. Loud enough for my cousins to snicker into their wine glasses. One year, I made the mistake of speaking up. I mentioned, quietly, that I'd just received a major commendation at work for a long-term project I'd been running. I wasn't bragging. I just wanted, for once, to be seen as something other than the family's quiet failure. Robert stared at me for a second like I'd told a joke he hadn't gotten yet. Then he threw his head back and laughed, loud enough that it pulled the whole table in with him. "Employee of the month?" he said. "They give you a $10 gift card for that, sweetheart?" Everyone laughed. My aunt, My cousins, even the ones who'd usually give me a sympathetic look, laughed that year, because laughing along with Robert was easier than being his next target. I remember exactly where I was sitting. I remember exactly how long it took me to decide I was done trying to make any of them see the truth. Here's what none of them knew. What none of them could have known, because I'd sworn an oath that made it a federal crime to tell them. My cubicle wasn't a cubicle. It didn't have windows, and it didn't have my name on a little plastic placard. It had a badge reader, a retinal scanner, and a designation most people only ever hear about in movies: a sensitive compartmented information facility. And what happened inside it was about to matter a lot more than any of them ever imagined. I wasn't a data entry clerk. I was a senior intelligence analyst for the National Counterterrorism Center, and my actual job was staring down encrypted signal intercepts 8, sometimes 12, hours a day, looking for the one thread that didn't belong. While Robert measured a person's worth in sports cars and job titles you could say out loud at a dinner party, my entire career was built on work I could never once mention at that table. Not the hours. Not the stress. Not the nights I didn't come home because something had lit up on a screen that couldn't wait until morning. A few months before my grandfather passed, I was in that facility tracking a cascade of chatter that looked, on the surface, like routine noise. Most analysts would have moved past it. I didn't. Buried underneath the decoy traffic was something else entirely. An active directive targeting an American diplomatic delegation overseas. Not a theory. Not a maybe. A live threat, moving fast. I flagged it to my director within the hour. He verified the analysis himself, and within a day, countermeasures were in motion that ended up saving dozens of lives on the ground. The commendation my uncle mocked over turkey and stuffing wasn't a plastic gift card. It was the Distinguished Service Medal, handed to me personally by a 4-star general, in a windowless room that officially does not appear on any building directory in Washington. So when Robert served me with a lawsuit calling me a jobless, incompetent grifter, and his attorney fired off a subpoena demanding my employment records, he thought he'd finally cornered me. He assumed I'd rather forfeit the entire estate than risk breaking my clearance and facing contempt of court. He wasn't wrong that the stakes were that high. He was wrong about everything else. Because instead of panicking, I picked up the phone and called Chloe, the one person I trusted enough to hand this to. Chloe used to work in government legal affairs, which meant she understood exactly what protocol existed for a situation like mine. One where the truth was real, verifiable, and completely off-limits in an open courtroom. We filed an official request through the National Counterterrorism Center's legal department, asking for a sealed attestation of my service to be delivered directly to the presiding judge for private review. Not read aloud. Not entered into public record. Just placed in the hands of one person who legally needed to know. On the day of the hearing, Robert brought the whole extended family. Aunts, cousins, the ones who'd laughed loudest at that Thanksgiving table. All of them there to watch what Robert had promised would be my public unraveling. His attorney played the room like an actor working a closing argument, calling me a ghost with no career, no standing, no verifiable character to speak of. Then Chloe stood and handed over the sealed black envelope. Robert's lawyer actually rolled his eyes at it. Muttered something to Robert about a desperate stunt. He clearly expected a stack of blank paper or some flimsy delay tactic dressed up in wax and formality. Judge Vance broke that seal without a word. I watched him read it once, then a second time, slower, like he needed to make sure he wasn't misreading the signature at the bottom. Signed by the Director of National Intelligence. Somewhere in that document was a detail neither Robert nor I could have predicted. A specific deployment, years earlier, where intelligence I'd personally flagged had protected a combat unit overseas from an ambush nobody saw coming. The same unit Judge Vance's own son had served in. I watched something shift behind his eyes. Not just professional respect. Something closer to recognition. Like he was looking at the reason his son came home at all. Judge Vance stood up slowly, straightened his robe, and delivered a crisp, formal salute directly at me, the way you'd salute a superior officer, not a defendant. He addressed me as ma'am, dismissed the case with prejudice on the spot. Then he turned his full attention to my Uncle Robert and hit him with sanctions for malicious prosecution. The legal system's way of saying you didn't just lose, you shouldn't have shown up at all. Before he brought the gavel down, Judge Vance did one more thing. He apologized. To me. In open court, in front of the family that had spent 15 years calling me a disappointment, a federal judge said he was sorry for the circus they'd put me through, and thanked me personally for sacrifices he could only partially understand. The courtroom deflated all at once. My aunts and cousins scrambled out of those pews so fast they nearly tripped over each other, unable to look at me on the way out. Robert just stood there, frozen, financially wrecked, socially radioactive, finally understanding that the quiet niece he'd spent a decade mocking held more real power than he'd ever touched in his life. A year later, I was sitting on the porch of my restored family estate, laptop open, running European operations as a section chief. My phone buzzed on the table. A frantic, rambling text from Robert, begging for financial help to save his failing business. I read every word, felt nothing close to anger, and honestly, nothing close to triumph either. I archived the message and went back to my coffee. My grandfather left me that estate because he was a retired officer himself, and he was the only one in that family who ever bothered to ask what I really did for a living. He knew exactly who I was, long before that courtroom did. If there's one thing I'd want you to take from this, it's that real strength never needs an audience. It doesn't perform at Thanksgiving. It just quietly does the work and lets the truth introduce itself when it's ready. If this story hit you the way I hope it did, hit subscribe, drop a comment telling me what you would have done in that courtroom, and share. Eat it with someone who's ever been underestimated by their own family.